The night settles gently over the hills, and the air is warm with the fading touch of sunlight. In a Roman household, the last traces of the day soften into shadow. Oil lamps are lit one by one, their flames trembling like tiny stars captured in clay bowls. Cicadas sing from the olive trees outside, their endless chorus a reminder of how life hums quietly even after the sun sinks away. The scent of smoke drifts faintly, carrying with it the aroma of herbs and bread baked earlier in the day. You can imagine yourself there, seated on a worn wooden stool in the courtyard. The stone beneath your feet is still warm from the day's heat, though a cooler breeze begins to slip in from the hills. Someone has drawn their cloak a little tighter, someone else stirs the embers, coaxing one last glow. The world feels slower in this moment, as though the whole city is preparing to rest. It is in such an hour that stories are told. Not shouted, not performed with fanfare, but whispered between family members, friends, or strangers resting shoulder to shoulder after a long day. Perhaps an elder begins, their voice steady and low, inviting those around them to lean closer. Perhaps a child nestles into the curve of a parent's side, half listening, half dreaming. You are there among them. The story drifts not toward you, but through you, as natural as the wind threading the olive branches. And this story begins with a young woman. She was not born a goddess, nor did she know that her life would be sung by generations to come. To her neighbors, she was simply a girl, though one who carried something rare, something so luminous it unsettled those who looked upon her. They called her Psyche. Now, to speak of Psyche's beauty is to risk falling into the old habit of telling legends only through appearance. But when people whispered her name in the streets, when women turned their heads and men paused in their tasks, it was not just the symmetry of her face or the brightness of her eyes they remarked upon. It was the stillness she carried, a gentleness that seemed almost unearthly. Children often found excuses to walk near her, tugging at their mother's sleeves, just to see if she would smile their way. Even the elderly, those who had lived through many seasons of hardship and loss, found themselves softened by her presence, though they could not explain why. And yet, beauty, as it so often does, brought with it isolation. You may know the feeling yourself, that sense of being seen yet not truly known, admired but held at a distance. For Psyche, neighbors spoke of her with awe, but few spoke to her with warmth. Her friends became fewer as the years went by, for who can compete with a girl whose very existence seemed touched by divinity? She walked through the marketplace with downcast eyes, the weight of gazes heavy on her shoulders. To some she was inspiration, to others, a reminder of what they lacked. Envy is an old companion of beauty. Across centuries and cultures, those who shine brightly often stand alone. The Romans themselves knew this truth well. They saw beauty as a gift, but also as a danger, a spark that might ignite pride in the one who carried it, or bitterness in those who did not. When Psyche's name spread beyond her town, when strangers traveled just to glimpse her face, admiration curdled into resentment. Why, they asked, did this mortal girl draw more reverence than Venus herself, goddess of love and beauty? Imagine being Psyche, hearing such murmurs but unable to silence them. Imagine her walking home as the day faded, feeling the words of others cling to her like shadows. What comfort can beauty bring, when it separates rather than unites? She was still only human, her hands grew tired from weaving, her skin flushed in the sun, her heart longed for companionship. But those around her, blinded by awe, could not see the ordinariness of her soul. It is easy to forget that myths are not about distant figures but about human truths. Psyche's story begins not in divine halls, but in the quiet ache of being misunderstood. Perhaps you, too, have felt that ache. Perhaps there have been moments when your gifts, your presence, or simply your difference set you apart from others, not always in ways you wished. That is where we begin, with empathy. With a reminder that behind every legend, there is a heart much like yours or mine, so let us linger in this Roman night. The lamps flicker softly, the walls throw long shadows, and the voices of neighbors drift across narrow streets. Someone speaks Psyche's name with admiration, another mutters it with envy. She herself sits alone, perhaps at a window, looking out at the stars that scatter across the darkening sky. She wonders what her life is meant to hold, why love feels so far away despite being so desperately close all around her. Her sigh is carried into the night air. Lost among the cicadas' song, stories like this are not merely entertainment. They are invitations, to reflect, to feel, to rest. Psyche's story is not about the flawless triumph of beauty, but about the soul's search for connection, trust, and peace. As we begin, let yourself rest in the stillness of this night. If this story touches you, I'd love for you to share how myths have found you in quiet moments. In the hush of night, when mortals set down their burdens, the gods remain restless. For the divine, time does not soften feelings nor blur memories. Their passions burn long and deep, like coals that never cool. And so, while Psyche sat in her quiet chamber, gazing into the Roman sky, another pair of eyes turned toward her from far beyond. Eyes bright as the sea on a summer noon, belonging to Venus, goddess of love and beauty. Now, Venus was no small figure in the Roman imagination. To them she was not just a goddess but a force woven into the fabric of life itself. Every blossom that opened, every heart that stirred, every glance that quickened into longing was said to carry her touch. Imagine what it must mean, then, to embody not only beauty but desire itself. A goddess such as this was praised in temples, garlanded with roses, sung to by poets, and painted on the walls of homes both humble and grand. Hers was a presence impossible to ignore, but admiration, even for the divine, can be fragile. Venus noticed that the hymns once raised to her honor had begun to falter. The garlands placed on her altars grew fewer, the sweet offerings less frequent. Instead, whispers rose through the streets, whispers of Psyche, the mortal maiden whose beauty eclipsed that of the goddess herself. Some said the girl was Venus in disguise, returned to earth. Others dared to claim she surpassed the goddess entirely. And so, in the halls of heaven, the sound of praise for a mortal reached the ears of one unaccustomed to sharing her throne. It is tempting to imagine Venus as cruel or jealous in a petty way. But let us pause. The Romans themselves understood their gods differently than we often do. To them, the gods were not perfect beings, free of fault or pettiness. Instead, they were mirrors of humanity, magnified in scale but not so far removed. A Roman woman might envy her neighbor's jewels or her rival's youthful skin. A goddess, too, could feel the sting of comparison. In this, the divine became more relatable, immortal, yes, but still touched by the very emotions that shape our own lives. What would it feel like, then, to be Psyche in this moment? Loved so fiercely by strangers, praised beyond measure, yet at the same time resented for the very thing that set her apart. Imagine walking through your town and hearing prayers lifted not to the goddess of love but to you. Flowers set not at her temple, but left upon your doorstep. For some, this would feel like power. But for Psyche, it was a burden she had never sought. Each gift weighed heavily. Each whispered prayer seemed to draw her further from the world of ordinary companionship she longed for. And in Venus's wounded pride, there was danger. The Romans believed divine favor was a delicate balance. A god could raise a family high one year, then strike them down the next. To live at the mercy of divine moods was to live always aware of fortune's fragility. Farmers knew that a good harvest was not simply the result of labor, but of the god's goodwill. A mother offering thanks at a shrine knew that a healthy birth was as much Venus's gift as her own strength. To draw a goddess's ire, then, was no small thing. It was to invite misfortune, perhaps ruin. So when Venus's eyes turned toward Psyche, there was both majesty and menace in her gaze. Not the careless spite of a petty rival, but the righteous fury of one who believed her place in the world was being stolen. She was, after all, the embodiment of beauty, the very essence of desire. To see mortals lifting their hands to another, this cut deep. And like so many women, divine or human, whose lives were defined by beauty, she felt her worth slipping away with every whispered hymn. Here we find a thread of empathy, even for the goddess. In Roman society, beauty was a double-edged gift. Women were praised for it, celebrated for it, but also judged, controlled, and envied because of it. A beautiful woman might secure a powerful marriage, yet she could also be the subject of slander, jealousy, and suspicion. Venus, in this sense, was not unlike the women who worshipped her. Her power came with chains, her radiance with fear. She was loved, yes, but always on condition that she remained the brightest flame, and Psyche, though mortal, was caught in the same trap. She had not asked for her beauty to be revered, but it defined her life all the same. Neighbors measured her worth by it. Strangers traveled long miles for a glimpse. And the goddess herself, who should have been her protector, became her greatest rival because of it. How heavy must that have felt, to be adored in a way that made one untouchable, resented, and ultimately endangered. Imagine again that you are Psyche, waking each day to the knowledge that your reflection in still water, the curve of your cheek in the lamplight, might be the reason your life unravels. How would you carry that? Would you feel pride, or only fear? Would you wish to be plain, invisible even, if only to be free? The Romans saw in this story not merely the wrath of a goddess, but the lesson that beauty invites envy, and envy invites suffering. In their world, every feast and triumph was shadowed by the fear of invidia, the evil eye, the jealousy of gods and men alike. To shine too brightly was to draw notice, and notice was as dangerous as it was flattering. Even today, the story rings true. Have you not seen how admiration so easily turns into envy, how love can live side by side with resentment? And so Venus stirred, her pride wounded, her glory diminished. She would not allow a mortal girl to take what was hers by right. And Psyche, still innocent of the storm gathering around her, would soon feel the weight of divine displeasure. What began as whispered envy in the streets would soon become a trial ordained by the goddess herself. As you listen, imagine. How would you carry the weight of being adored yet resented? Share your thoughts, I'd love to know. The air was heavy with silence when Psyche was led to the temple. It was not the silence of peace, but of dread, the kind that makes every footstep sound too loud, every whispered prayer feel too fragile. Her family walked beside her, their faces pale, their hands clutching one another as though touch might ward off the fear curling in their stomachs. Above them, the sky seemed unnaturally wide, its blue stretching unbroken, indifferent to the sorrow of one family making their way up the worn steps of stone. The temple itself loomed like a shadow from another age. Its columns reached skyward, tall and cold, carved with stories of gods whose eyes seemed always watchful. At the threshold, the smell of incense wrapped around them, thick with myrrh and resin. The smoke curled upward like pale ribbons, vanishing into the dimness of the ceiling beams. Someone had left offerings, fruit still fresh, flowers already wilting, a little bowl of wine glistening like blood in the lamplight. Here, mortals came not to rest, but to seek answers, even when those answers cut like a blade. In the Roman world, oracles were both feared and revered. People came to them when no other path could be seen, when uncertainty or suffering pressed too hard upon the heart. Mothers brought questions of childbirth. Soldiers asked whether victory awaited them in battle. Farmers begged to know if rain would fall or if famine loomed. The oracle was thought to be the mouth of the divine, her words not her own, but shaped by a god's breath, carried on the rhythm of smoke and chant. And though the Romans were practical people, accustomed to toil and trade, there remained in them a reverence for fate, a belief that somewhere, written beyond mortal hands, was a story they could not escape. Psyche had been brought here for such a purpose. The people no longer believed her beauty a blessing, they had begun to see it as a curse. She was loved by all, yet none dared to marry her. The suitors who might have courted her instead turned to the temples, whispering that she was too divine, too dangerous, too unlike themselves to be a bride. Her father, weary and ashamed, came to the oracle not for prosperity, not for victory, but for guidance on what to do with his daughter's life. Inside, the shadows thickened. A priestess moved like a figure from a dream, her robes trailing softly, her hair bound with ribbons that caught the lamplight. She guided Psyche toward the altar, where she was asked to kneel. The girl's knees pressed into the cold stone floor, and she lowered her head, feeling the weight of incense in her lungs. Around her, the temple whispered with the faint sound of chants, the murmurs of sacred words spoken not for human understanding but for divine ears. And then the oracle spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried with it a gravity that filled every hollow in the chamber. Her eyes seemed distant, as if they gazed beyond walls, beyond the mortal world, into some realm only she could see. She spoke of Psyche's fate with solemn certainty. She would not be wed to a mortal man, nor would she know the comforts of ordinary life. Instead, she was destined for a monstrous husband, one who waited for her upon a high cliff. A creature feared by gods and men alike. She would be left there, abandoned, to meet whatever awaited her. The words fell like stones into still water, rippling through the family with despair. Her mother covered her face, weeping softly. Her sisters clutched at their garments, horrified and helpless. Her father, the king, bowed his head with the heaviest of griefs, the grief of a parent who must sacrifice his child, not by choice, but by decree of powers greater than himself. And Psyche? She knelt in the incense and felt her breath steady, strangely calm. Fear, yes, fear sat at the edge of her chest like a shadow. But beneath it was something else, something quieter. Perhaps it was resignation, perhaps surrender. Or perhaps, deep within, it was the faintest sense of release. For so long, her beauty had been both gift and prison, lifting her high yet isolating her from the simplest joys of companionship. Now, fate itself had spoken. There was no more pretending that her life could be ordinary. And in that certainty, however terrible, there was a strange comfort. Still, she was human. As she lifted her gaze toward the smoke rising above the altar, her heart whispered questions. What kind of creature awaited her? Would she suffer long, or would her end be swift? Would anyone remember her as more than the girl who was too beautiful for the gods to bear? She thought of her sisters, their laughter once shared, their squabbles over ribbons and jewelry, the warmth of sitting together at the loom. Would those memories vanish like smoke? Outside the temple, the sun had begun to set. The light that poured across the stones was golden, casting long shadows down the steps. The family left in silence, their footsteps heavy, each lost in their own sorrow. Psyche walked beside her father, her face lifted toward the horizon. Though her heart trembled, she carried herself with a grace that silenced the whispers of those who watched. Some pitied her. Some thought her cursed. Others, secretly, felt a sharp relief. Perhaps now the goddess's anger would cool, perhaps their own families would be spared misfortune. That night, as Psyche lay upon her bed, the oracle's words pressed into her mind again and again. A monster husband. A lonely path to the cliff. The end of her childhood, the end of her family's protection. And yet, amid her tears, she found herself breathing more deeply than she had in years. For once, she did not have to wonder what was expected of her, what others saw in her face, what new envy or adoration might greet her in the morning. Her path was written. She would walk it, even if it led her to ruin. This is the moment where myth becomes deeply human. Beneath the grandeur of gods and the rituals of temples lies the simple truth of a young woman facing abandonment. Not chosen for her deeds, not rewarded for her kindness, but cast out because her beauty had become too much to bear. How many across history have felt this same weight, that their gifts, their differences, their very existence, drew them into trials they never sought? As Psyche closed her eyes, the night seemed to hold its breath with her. In the silence, she found the courage to whisper her own prayer, not to Venus, not to the gods who envied her, but to the stars themselves, ancient and unchanging. Perhaps they would remember her, even if no one else did. Perhaps they would shine on her still, even when she stood upon that cliff alone. Do you believe fate is written for us, or do we write it as we walk? Leave me your thoughts after listening. The wind came for Psyche at a moment when her heart felt heaviest. You can imagine her standing on the edge of a cliff, the salt taste of sea foam on her lips, waves crashing on rocks far below, and all around her that tense, expectant silence. Then, without warning, a breath, a current of air warm as a lover's whisper, rolled in, lifting her hair and tugging at the folds of her gown. It caught under her feet, then clasped her gently under arms she could not see. Softness enveloped her skin, air so tender it felt like hands reconciling love and fear. The wind carried her upward, lifting her above the foam, above the jagged stones, above the sea's ceaseless roar, until the salt scent faded, replaced by the faint perfume of blossoms she could not name. She closed her eyes, arms spread to balance, trusting her invisible guide even though every fiber of her being was uncertain. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself standing upon marble flooring cool against her bare feet. In the dim glow of lamps of an otherworldly light, columns rose around her, gold leaf filigree tracing patterns that glimmered like flames caught in still water. Archways led into corridors where shadows played softly against walls carved with vines and birds and women dancing. There was no sound of her own breathing for a moment. Only this palace's whispered welcome. The air here was warm, not heavy, but alive with presence. A faint hum, like wings beating just beyond hearing. A light touch at her wrist, or so she thought, not quite human, not quite merely air. If she reached, her hand passed through nothing but felt a tug of acceptance, of devotion, of something more. She shivered, not with fear, but with the tremor of love unseen. In the distance she saw pools of water, mirror-clear and motionless, reflecting golden ceilings and trailing lanterns. Psyche knelt beside one, the cold marble biting through her skirts, her heart pounding in curiosity. Her reflection showed eyes wide with wonder, cheeks flushed, hair tossed by invisible currents. She leaned closer, and for a moment believed she saw another presence in the reflection, a shape behind her, glowing, a voice in the hush. But when she turned, there was nothing but empty corridor, humming lamps, pillars reaching upward. This hidden palace had no gates of iron, no guards at its doors. The walls were open to wind and to light, to the unseen heart of the night. Psyche wandered, slowly, touching smooth walls, pausing to listen to the drip of water somewhere far off, to the faint rustle of vines in some inner courtyard. Every sensation, marble cool under fingertips, air scented with blossoms, distant wings brushing against silence, made the impossible feel real. Then, a voice, soft as the rustle of silk, spoke, not from darkness, not from light, but from all around her. It did not begin with loud thunder, nor with proclamation. It was gentle, almost shy. "You are welcome," it said, "beloved." She could feel it in the hollow of her chest, a warmth that is not heat, a certainty that is not seeing. It was Cupid, though she would not see him yet. Though he remained unmapped by her eyes. A presence, faith made audible, a trust she did not know she held. Psyche stood, heart trembling. What kind of God trusts so much in secrecy? What kind of love demands surrender even before sight? The voice guided her past corridors, past chambers hung with the softest cloths, past fountains murmuring under lantern glow. She walked, not knowing whether to fear or hope, but leaning always towards something she felt rather than saw. The rooms glowed golden but never gaudy. Draperies rustled in an unseen breeze. Pillars cast gentle, dancing shadows. The floor was smooth, polished to a mirror of hidden truths. Psyche laid her hand on a column, cool, solid. Beneath the touch, she felt grounding. Here was structure, here was comfort, even in not knowing. At night, a low music played, harps or perhaps the soft plucking of strings somewhere distant. Psyche listened, lips parted, letting the melody fill her, letting the invisible embrace wash over her. She closed her eyes, leaning against a wall of marble, warm from breath or maybe from unseen light. It was a love that demanded nothing of her except presence. It asked her to trust what she could not see. To believe in warmth without touch, voice without form. Here, love is not grand spectacle. It is the hush after thunder, the moment you exhale and know you are safe. It is the invisible hand feeding you cool water when your throat is parched, the whisper in darkness that says you are home. Psyche, in that palace, felt both vulnerable and held. She pondered, is love always like this? A thing that hides, that asks you for faith before it shows itself fully? Is trust the courageous part, the dangerous part, even more than love? She wondered whether she might grow to know the face of this presence, whether seeing would make belief easier, or whether belief would make seeing unnecessary. And all the while, the palace, this place of shadows and golden light, seemed to breathe with her. The wind sighed in halls. The lamps flickered in time with her pulse. The vines outside the windows rustled, as if singing in praise of something new born within her. In that hidden palace, Psyche learned that love unseen can be more powerful than love confessed. She learned that surrender, slow, hesitant, trembling, can be its own kind of strength. That mystery need not frighten, but may become the cradle of hope. As you lie here, in your own quiet space, imagine being Psyche in that moment, carried by unseen wings, guided by a presence you cannot yet name, trusting in warmth when darkness is around. In your own life, have you ever trusted something unseen, a feeling, a dream? I'd love to hear. The day Psyche's sisters arrived, the palace opened its unseen arms in silence. She had longed for their presence, for a familiar voice, for laughter that reminded her of a home she thought she had lost forever. And so, when the wind carried them gently into the golden halls, Psyche felt her heart lift with relief. At last, she could share with her sisters the wonder that had embraced her, the unseen hands that had carried her to safety, the invisible voice that whispered devotion in the quiet of night. At first, her sisters were astonished. Their sandals touched marble that seemed to glow, their fingers brushed draperies softer than lamb's wool, their eyes widened at fountains that sang like silver bells. They walked slowly, touching, testing, exclaiming in awe. Psyche, radiant with affection, watched them with the tender hope of a younger sister who wishes to be understood. She offered them fruits sweeter than honey, goblets filled with nectar that glistened like jewels. Their voices echoed in the halls, sharp and bright, filling the palace with the sound of kinship reborn, but as the moments passed, awe gave way to shadows in their eyes. Envy crept in, quiet at first, then sharper. For in the back of their minds, each sister compared Psyche's fortune to her own. In their homes, marriage had brought duty and weariness, expectations and small cruelties. Here, their younger sister lived in abundance. Tended by invisible servants, beloved by a husband she spoke of in gentle tones, though none had yet seen him, Roman families often wove their lives together through marriages arranged for advantage or survival. Sisters, though bound by love, were not free from rivalries. Each sought stability, protection, a place within the fragile balance of a household. In such a world, the prosperity of one could feel like the diminishment of another. And so, within the gilded beauty of Psyche's palace, beneath its painted ceilings and golden lamps, the old tension stirred. Her sisters began to question, at first with feigned concern. "This palace is wondrous, little one said, trailing her hand across a marble pillar. But who built it for you? Who rules over it?" The other leaned close, her eyes narrowing. "And your husband, where is he? Why does he not sit by your side? Why do we see no trace of him?" Psyche, caught between pride and fear, answered softly. She spoke of love without form, of whispers in the night, of trust that filled the spaces where sight could not reach. She told them of a voice that soothed, of hands that held her only in dreams. Her cheeks flushed as she confessed her happiness, the serenity she felt in surrendering to what she could not see. But the sisters' brows knit tighter. Their voices, once warm, grew colder. "Do you not see, child? You speak of a love unseen, yet what man hides himself if not a monster? What if this husband of yours is no god at all, but a serpent, a beast waiting for the moment you are too trusting to resist?" Their words slithered into the air like smoke from a brazier, clinging, acrid, bitter. Psyche laughed at first, shaking her head. But in the quiet of night, after her sisters had gone, their whispers echoed louder than the voice of her beloved. Doubt, once planted, took root. She touched the bed where unseen arms had held her, wondering, what if they are right? What if trust blinds me to danger? This is the cruel nature of envy, not only that it wounds, but that it disguises itself as concern. Psyche's sisters, whether from jealousy or from fear disguised as love, sought to shake her certainty. And Psyche, still young, still tender, listened. For who among us does not lean in when a sister whispers warning, even if it burns the ears to hear it? Sibling bonds are complicated threads. In Roman households, a sister might be a confidant, a rival, a reminder of obligations left behind. They grew together under the same roof, shared the same stories and the same bread, yet adulthood often pulled them into different worlds, marriages that could be harsh, households that demanded loyalty elsewhere. To see Psyche lifted beyond their station was not only envy, but a painful reminder of their own paths, narrower and harsher, and Psyche, gentle, open Psyche, wanted so badly to be loved by them still. She felt torn between two devotions, to the unseen voice that had promised her safety, and to the sisters who had known her since childhood. Who had once wiped her tears and laughed with her in the fields. Which voice was true? Which love should she honor? The palace seemed quieter after they departed. Psyche wandered its halls, fingers brushing the same pillars her sisters had touched, lips repeating the words they had spoken. Was she foolish? Was she blind? She pressed her palms to her face, whispering into the silence, "Tell me, beloved, who are you?" And though the voice came again, soft as ever, warm with devotion, doubt dulled her hearing. Doubt is part of love. It is the tremor in the heart when trust feels too vast, too fragile to carry. Psyche felt it, as we all do. She wrestled with the ache of suspicion, the sting of betrayal not yet real but already imagined. She longed to believe wholly, yet feared the weight of her sister's words, "We can forgive her." For who among us has not stood in such a place, held between trust and fear? Between the whisper that warms us and the whisper that chills us? Psyche's trial is no less human for being told as myth. It is the trial of love itself, to believe, even when others would tear that belief apart. And so, her nights grew restless. She lay awake in the golden chamber, the air alive with the hum of unseen wings, wondering whether she rested in the arms of a god, or in the coils of some hidden doom. As you listen, perhaps you too have felt this edge, the moment when certainty wavered, when doubt seed began to grow. Doubt is part of love, have you felt it too? Share your reflections if you'd like.